thought to be a disorder, turns out to be a gift, understanding correctly to support our unique children. Have you ever noticed your child behaving or expressing themselves a bit differently from their peers? And wondered if something might be wrong? Sometimes, as adults, we can be quick to label these differences as a disorder. But here's the thing. Those differences might just be signs of a hidden talent your child possesses. Before diving into the details, let's outline the key points we'll cover in today's talk. First, we'll clarify what pathologizing behavior means and why it's a concern. Next, we'll explore the characteristics often seen in gifted children that are easily mistaken for symptoms of psychological disorders. And finally, we'll emphasize the importance of careful diagnosis, as a single diagnosis can impact a child throughout their school years and even their entire life. Alright, let's get started. A story of misunderstanding. When gifts are mislabeled. Many parents have likely faced concerns similar to the story I'm about to share. Imagine you have a young son, and his teachers repeatedly suggest he might have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. One mother shared the story of her son. She first heard about the possibility of her son having ADHD when he was around 6 years old, in first grade. What stood out was that this boy had taught himself to read at a very young age. And by first grade, he was fluently reading books meant for children aged 8 and up. At school, he longed to read the science books he loved at home. However, his teacher wouldn't allow it. She insisted he finish the textbook and pass a reading comprehension test first before touching other books. For a curious, high-ability child like him, being forced to sit still with simpler textbooks felt like torture. This made it hard for him to focus. And he often fidgeted, knowing exciting science books were waiting for him at home. It wasn't until he was 8 that his mother took him for a psychological evaluation. Interestingly, during the discussion of the test results, it was the young boy himself who first suggested to his mother that adults were increasingly pathologizing perfectly normal childhood behaviors. This story dates back to 1998. The mother realized that since then, the tendency to view normal childhood behaviors as disorders has only grown. This story shows how a child's differences or exceptional abilities can sometimes be viewed negatively. So, what exactly is pathologizing behavior? Pathologizing behavior, when normal becomes abnormal. To understand this, we need to recognize that in psychology, researchers often study what's considered a disorder, something that deviates from the norm, or is deemed abnormal. Pathologizing a behavior means taking a behavior that's entirely normal in children and treating it as a problem. A sign of illness that requires intervention, treatment, or even medication. Sadly, this is becoming quite common in our society, especially with behaviors that are perfectly typical for children. For example, boys are often energetic and struggle to sit still for long periods, especially when asked to stay quiet in class. Nowadays, if a boy seems restless or unfocused in class, he might immediately be suspected of having ADHD. Of course, some children do have ADHD, but not every energetic or fidgety child does. Similarly, children with fluctuating moods, happy one moment, sad the next, might quickly be labeled as having bipolar disorder. While some children may indeed have this disorder, not every child with mood swings does. Notably, this tendency to pathologize normal behaviors is even more common in gifted children than in others. Why is that? Let's explore this next. Recognizing gifts. What's different? What's abnormal? You might wonder, how do we distinguish between a sign of giftedness and a genuine issue that needs attention? Defining normal behavior is already tricky, and identifying behaviors in gifted children is even more challenging because many of their behaviors resemble symptoms of psychological disorders. Picture a gifted Intelligent, curious child stuck in a classroom environment that doesn't match their abilities. They might act out physically, becoming restless, unable to sit still, or disrupting others. They may struggle to focus on lessons and seem daydreamy. Yet, the moment you give them a challenge suited to their abilities, those problematic behaviors can disappear, sometimes overnight. Unfortunately, schools often aren't willing or equipped to provide these children with more challenging tasks. They might argue the child isn't mature enough, or assume they can't handle advanced work, even when the opposite is true. Additionally, other normal behaviors in gifted children are often misunderstood, especially those tied to emotions. Psychologist Dombrowski described overexcitabilities in gifted children, meaning they feel emotions intensely. When sad, they're deeply sad. When happy, they're overjoyed. This intensity can lead some to mistakenly think these children are bipolar. But they're not, they simply experience emotions more vividly than others. Another common overexcitability in gifted children is sensory sensitivity. These children might be bothered by loud noises, dislike the feel of a sock's seam against their skin, or avoid certain foods due to texture or taste. Such behaviors can lead adults to suspect sensory processing disorder, SPD. A typical description of SPD is: children with SPD may overreact to sensations, finding clothing, physical touch, light, sound, food, or other sensory inputs unbearable. Sound familiar? If your child covers their ears at the movies because the sound is too loud, removes socks due to discomfort, tugs at clothing tags, or refuses certain foods because of texture, they might have sensory overexcitability, a common trait in gifted children. Moreover, many gifted children are perfectionists. They strive for perfection in their own work and may expect the same from others. This can lead them to correct a teacher's mistake in class, not to challenge authority, but to ensure accuracy. However, this behavior might be mistaken for oppositional defiant disorder, ODD. Similarly, a gifted child's perfectionism might manifest as a need for order, arranging objects neatly by shape, color, or size. This could be misinterpreted as obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. Clearly, the line between giftedness and disorder can be thin. So, why is accurate diagnosis so critical? Accurate diagnosis, the foundation for holistic development. Some might argue that a diagnosis isn't that important as long as we treat the child's behaviors. In reality, some parents take their child for an evaluation and receive a diagnosis, such as the need for an individualized education plan, IEP. When designing an IEP, educators often base it on the diagnosed disability, assigning challenging tasks to treat the supposed issue and return the child to normal. For example, a child diagnosed with ADHD might be tasked with staying quiet for a set time. This approach, however, is flawed. First, such treatments are often ineffective. More importantly, gifted children, like any child with special needs, require tailored educational methods that match their exceptional abilities. Trying to treat symptoms they don't have while ignoring their actual developmental needs is clearly an ineffective intervention. Another issue is that some diagnoses come with treatments involving medication, such as Ritalin for ADHD. Did you know Ritalin is classified as a Schedule II narcotic, similar to cocaine, with significant risks? Why would we give a child such a drug for a condition they might not even have? The final flaw in this approach is that it leads children to misunderstand themselves. It convinces them that their normal behaviors are abnormal or problematic. It's like trying to fix a child for having blue eyes, instead of helping them understand their unique traits and potential. We inadvertently tell them something is wrong with them. If a child does have a condition like ADHD, bipolar disorder, or another disorder. Our role is to help them understand themselves, accept who they are, and learn to adapt, not to treat a disability. Of course, some children are both gifted and have a disability, known as twice exceptional. For these children, careful diagnosis is even more crucial. A diagnosis follows a child through their school years and can impact their entire life. Once made, it's hard to reverse, and it can create significant barriers to nurturing their gifts. Ultimately, whether we're parents, teachers, or educators, we all want the best for children. Understanding their behaviors correctly, recognizing their hidden gifts, and avoiding the pathologization of normal behaviors is the first step to supporting their development effectively. Thank you for listening. I hope these insights offer fresh and helpful perspectives for your journey in raising your beloved child.